Now this is Kronos. Kronos, the deity that corresponded to the planet Saturn. In fact, Kronos is the name of the planet in Greek. It was said to eat his children. Then he was induced to regurgitate the children, and they became the pantheon that we commonly associate with Greece. Now, the pantheon of Greece is in parallel with the pantheon of Egypt and the pantheon of Babylon and many other ancient cultures. But it's all based on this idea that Kronos was an eater of his children. And the thing that all of the eternal deities have in common is the demand for child sacrifice. We know that best from the biblical stories about Moloch and Chemosh, the gods that Solomon embraced in his later years that demanded sons and daughters. And as God said through his prophet, I never asked for any such thing, neither did it enter my mind. But that is the nature of the eternal deities. That is the nature of the evil that we face even today. It's an ancient evil, and it is not at all divorced from the worship of this ancient God. Now we see its symbols everywhere, and so I'm going to introduce a few of the symbols. And strangely enough, until I started this study, I did not have an appreciation for how closely they paralleled actual physical features of the planet itself. The immediate question was, how did the ancients know without modern telescopes? How did they know that these were features of the planet? So this is the planet Saturn, and we will see how the symbols of these ancient little g gods, and particularly those that were said to be children of Kronos or children of Saturn, correspond to physical features of this planet. It's an interesting planet. You know, it has these characteristic rings, which are described symbolically in a lot of interesting ways. So here we see the beginnings of ancient Sumerian representations of Saturn. You see, Saturn is represented as a star. And that is really underappreciated to most folks, because Saturn is not just a cold, rocky planet. It is, in fact, it emits more radiation than it absorbs from the sun. It is, in fact, a star. There are those that think at one time it was what was described as a brown dwarf star emitting a red light, and may have been part of a binary star system in our solar system. But it's represented as the orb between the horns of the bull gods. And so we'll see that the bull gods become important symbols of the Saturnal little g gods or deities. And you see that it's represented as a star. The rings, as they disappear behind the star, gave the appearance at some angles of having horns. And so the horn symbolism emerges from the very earliest recorded civilizations on Earth in ancient Sumer. You see it emerge in other fairly old, not quite as ancient as those, but you see the same imagery of the star between the horns. This is often misinterpreted as being a crescent moon. If you ask imams, where did this symbol come from? They really don't know. But it is, in fact, a symbol of Saturn. The star emitting light energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation surrounded by the rings. You can tell this is not an eclipsing moon, because the moon in eclipse is fully covered by the shadow of the earth. So this is clearly not the shadow of the earth eclipsing the moon. This is one of the more interesting features of the planet Saturn. This is a picture from the Cassini space probe. A lot of amazing pictures from the Cassini space probe. And these were published by NASA. And what it shows is there's a permanent electromagnetic storm formation on the north pole of Saturn from which many of the symbols derive. So what we see from this emerge is that an important symbol of planet Saturn, as well as the Saturnal deities, was the cube. And Saturn was described as a dark sun, and so the symbol of the black cube becomes an important symbol of Saturn. And you can see that the projection of a cube up on one point is actually a hexagon, in keeping with the permanent cloud formation on planet Saturn. So we see the symbolism of the black cube emerge in some really very interesting places. And we don't want to overinterpret this symbol. However, it is very startling that where you see this symbol, it has other connections with the planet Saturn, especially in esoteric thought, occultism, and Kabbalistic Judaism. This is a picture of some collection of these black cubes. They're in every major city all over the world. I had pictures of them in Stuttgart. They've been photographed all around the world as a cult of the black sun, a modern cult of Saturn. Places its symbols in conspicuous places all over the world. This is another famous black cube, and you can see the similarities between the permanent electromagnetic storm formation on the north pole of Saturn and the practice of the Hajj in Islam, where they revolve in the same direction around a black cube within the confines of a hexagon. That's not accidental symbolism. Looks kind of familiar. That is the storm formation on the north pole of Saturn as photographed by the Cassini space probe. And the black cube shows up in some interesting places. These are the phylacteries of Judaism. They contain scripture passages in keeping with, and my word shall be as frontlets between their eyes, and the scriptural references. But there are other things about some specific applications of this that really would make one take pause, give one pause. Now this is a three-dimensional representation of what's called a hypercube, or a tesseract, which is an attempt to represent in three dimensions the concept of a fourth-dimensional cube. This is a representation of an enneagram, which has found popularity in Christian churches, disturbingly. There's nothing Christian about the enneagram or its psychological applications. The founder of this esoteric discipline admits very openly that it came to him by automatic writing, where he was possessed by a spirit guide, which gave him this concept. And this is, it gets a little complicated conceptually, but this is a two-dimensional representation of the folding of a tesseract. So it too has its origins in Saturnal symbolism. Now here's probably the more famous representations. This is the talisman of Saturn from esoteric mystery religions, which are also said to be the talisman of Solomon. So you see a number of Saturnal symbols inherent in this. You see the hexagram, you see the bull and its horns, a number of other esoteric symbols. You see the sickle of Saturn in the pentagram on the left, a reference to Saturn, but those symbols we will see also in association elsewhere with the planet Saturn. Now, this is a permanent cloud formation, electromagnetic storm formation on the south pole of Saturn. So here's another physical feature of Saturn that we find represented in mythology, art, and in the symbols of the Saturnal gods. This is the Eye of Horus. Horus being an Egyptian Saturnal god. The eye of any Egyptian god always represents its feminine characteristic, its feminine representation. The eye was said to represent the feminine because the feminine was said to be the protector of the male deity, essentially watched his back. It was the eye that kept out looking for his benefit. And so we see the eye of Horus, we see the eye of various Egyptian gods representing their feminine aspect, as in Kabbalistic Judaism, which says that the Shekinah is the feminine aspect of the God of Israel. We see the eye show up all sorts of places, and certainly within the triangle, we will see the triangle here in a little bit as another Saturnal symbol. So the eye within the triangle is really a very obvious symbol of Saturn and the influences of its feminine aspect. This is the God of this world. And so we'll see this show up in a number of places. I just thought you'd be interested to know you carry them around in your pocket. Now here is the astrological symbol of Saturn. And this is a schematic representation of the sickle of Saturn. Kronos, often represented as an older man carrying a sickle, sort of like Father Time. Chronos, chronology, a Greek word that's used to describe time, is all those things are associated with the planet Saturn. And this symbol will show up a lot of places. You do well to remember this, because next time you see this, you'll understand what the influences behind communism are. This is just a disassembly of the sickle and the handle of the sickle to resemble a hammer and sickle. It is a Saturnal symbol, and we'll see the influence of Saturn in modern spirit of Antichrist. And Bolsheviks were certainly representatives of Saturn, or Sabbatean, Sabbatai being a Hebrew word for the planet Saturn. Now, where do you suppose we're seeing this symbol? Where is this symbol, and what does it represent? Did we find this somewhere in the Middle East? No. This is on a 10,000-year-old Hindu temple, and it represents the conjugal union between Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and feminine aspects of that Saturnal deity. Shiva being the masculine with the up-pointing triangle, Shakti being the feminine with the triangle pointing down. And we'll see these symbols emerge in other places in just a second. And the conjugal union between the two representing the Am, or the universal deity in Hinduism. We see the symbol emerge in Freemasonry, which in Freemasonry derives it from Jewish mysticism, from Kabbalah. And the G in the middle doesn't represent any god you or I think about. And here it is in a thinly veiled form, in the form of the compass and square, which is in fact just another representation of a hexagram. Now we see these symbols emerge. This is the tree of life that is derived from what's called Lurian Kabbalah. And Kabbalah has been around ever since Rabbinical Judaism has been around. It was certainly around in the time of Jesus, but it developed greatly as the descent of this form of idolatry progressed through history. And we're going to zoom in a little bit on some of these symbols. But these spheres, or sephirot, are said to be vessels in which were contained divine sparks, and it gets very, very complicated from there. But at the bottom, you can see what's described as the abyss, all the way to the top of the tree, where the Ein Sof, and Ein Sof are all described as the primordial God, the God of Judaism, the Ein Sof. And then we see the representations here. And I want to call your attention to two in particular, because some of these sephirot are said to be feminine characteristics of God, others are masculine. And we're going to look at the symbolism inherent in two. So we go to the top. You see on the left in black there, called the Binah, or understanding, Hebrew word for understanding. And on the right, you see the Chokmah, which is said to be a masculine attribute of God. You see the symbolism up a little closer. What's that symbol in the center of Binah? I recognize it. Binah is said to be a representation of the Shekinah. And if you read the Zohar, which is really a very difficult thing to do, but if you can ever get through it, you'll find that the other name for Shekinah is Ashtaroth, or Asherah. This is a feminine aspect of a saturnal god, with the astrological symbol for Saturn right in the middle and the downward pointing triangle just below it. Then on the right, you see the masculine with the upward pointing triangle. The fusion of these two, you see the dotted circle in the middle. This is where the Binah and the Chokmah join together. Now, where the downward pointing triangle and the upward pointing triangle converge in the center of the tree of life, one might look at the serpent imagery and think, well, that's some profane representation of what this means. It is not. This is mainstream Kabbalah. And what you see are the serpents, which are symbolic representations of Messiah in Kabbalism. Not Satan, not the devil, but Messiah, the Messiah, son of David, and the Messiah, son of Joseph, the two Messiahs, or the two serpents, either side of the serpent, the winged serpent that rises from the abyss and becomes the Savior of mankind. And this is not some profane representation. This is mainstream Kabbalah. I had some Hebrew scholars at the seminary try to help me decipher some of this, and it's almost impossible if you think that's real Hebrew. It's actually the strange Aramaic, because the letters in Aramaic and Hebrew are identical. They're all Babylonian characters at this point. This is the strange Aramaic that the Zohar is written in, that is largely Kabbalistic literature, which is one of the reasons it makes it so opaque to someone that wants to study it. But you see the symbol in the middle and its true meaning in Judaism. It's often called the Star of David, However, ask any rabbi, what's the association between that symbol and King David? They go, I don't know of any. However, it is associated with his son Solomon, and it has everything to do with the idolatry that he descended into in his later years. Once you begin to understand the nature of the symbolism and the Sabbatean influence, and we'll cover all of this in a lot more detail, but I do want to introduce the symbols. You understand the irony of this symbol. This is, of course, the flannel yellow star that Jews in pre-World War II Germany were forced to wear. It's not because it was the symbol that identified them as Jews. It identified them as victims of the saturnal influence, or the influence of Saturn, the influence of Antichrist. And we'll see in the antipathy between the scarlet beast and the woman, the prostitute dressed like the high priest that dominates it, that the beast hates the woman. And so what we see is the Sabbatean influence, or the saturnal influence, and its hatred toward the religious Jews. And we'll see a bit of this as we explore more, but it's particularly ironic that this was chosen because this was not really a well-known symbol of Judaism at the time. And it's an interesting history to explore beyond the scope of what I'm going to get into. Now, this gives you a little bit of insight into the Sabbatean influence, or the influence of Saturn. And Sabbatean has an interesting connection historically, that when we discuss the nature of Antichrist, that we will get into in some detail. But this is an excerpt from the diaries of Theodor Herzl, who is said to be the father of modern Zionism. Now, he's not the father, but he was certainly an important influence in the 19th century toward what was termed a homeland in Palestine for the Jews. This is a startling quote from his own memoirs. It's essential that the sufferings of Jews become worse. And this was in 19th century Germany, where Herzl lived. He said, this will assist in realization of our plans. I have an excellent plan. I shall induce anti-Semites to liquidate Jewish wealth. The anti-Semites will assist us thereby in that they will strengthen the persecution and oppression of Jews. The anti-Semites shall be our best friends. Whose best friend? The Zionists. And we'll look at Zionism as an Antichrist influence, secular Zionism as an Antichrist influence as we proceed. So, back to our planet Saturn. We've talked about the North Pole, the South Pole, the rings, and rings give the planet the appearance of having wings, and so we'll see the winged orb emerge as an important symbol of Saturn. But also, you see the dark ring near the top quarter? And I may have to come back to this image after I show you the next pictures. But what that appears to be, apparently to some people, is a snake devouring its own tail. And this is an electromagnetic storm formation that appears on the planet Saturn about every 15 years. So it's not a permanent formation, but it is a recurring one. And it shows up in saturnal symbolism as what's called an Ouroboros. And this is a very important occultic and esoteric symbol. We see the winged orb, the winged serpent gods of Egypt. Here's one that's a little more important. This is Hathor, the consort of the Egyptian saturnal male god. This is the feminine aspect of the saturnal deity. So you see the dark sun. There are two orbs that are represented as suns in Egyptian symbolism. One is yellow, the sun that lights our sky, and the dark or orange orb, which is always a symbol of Saturn. And there it is resting between the horns of the cow goddess Hathor, who's bearing a number of serpent symbols and declared in Egyptian art as the feminine saturnal deity. There's another representation of Hathor as a serpent, as a cobra. That's just there for comic relief. No symbols. Although you see the serpent symbolism in some surprising places, apparently. Now, a number of other symbols. The constellation Capricorn in astrology is associated with the planet Saturn. The triangle in the triangle is also an important symbol of the planet Saturn in astrology, and the constellation is the goat. And you remember that men, and the goat demons that were objects of idolatry in the wilderness wanderings with the children of Israel were saturnal deities. And so these goat demons that were worshipped, and the goat saturnal male aspect of it, men, were important saturnal deities in the idolatry of the early Hebrew nation. But the overlapping triangles in a different form are represented here, but it's the same. It's representing the same thing as the hexagram. So we see the symbols of Saturn arise in modern astrology. A downward pointing triangle, upward pointing, the astrological symbol of Saturn as its ruling planet, etc. And it's all embedded into modern occultism and modern astrology. And you talk about a collection of symbols here. We have the star between the horns, we have the goat, we have the androgyny, both the male and feminine and masculine attributes. The androgyny of Baphomet here is his hand gestures in this statue are representing as above, so below. The occultic symbol, saying of the Oriental rite of mysticism. So we see other symbols emerging, and the path to these is not as clear, and so I'm not going to bite this off, but owls are also saturnal symbols, mainly because they appear to have horns, and so the evolution from the bull deities of Saturn and the owl is a little less straightforward, but the owl is an important symbol. It was especially important as a symbol of Moloch in ancient Canaan. So here we see a picture taken from a place near San Francisco, California, called the Bohemian Grove, where where a large stone representation of Moloch exists, and the ceremony is done every year. That is supposed to be a mock human sacrifice before the statue of Moloch, called the cremation of care. On the left hand, in the left-hand picture, if you look carefully, you'll recognize two future U.S. presidents at the time this picture was taken. This was before Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan were elected president, that they attended these ceremonies at the Bohemian Grove. So lest we underestimate the power of these symbols and how it affects us today. This is a picture taken from Jeffrey Epstein's island, private island in the Caribbean. You can see symbols there emerge. And it is said that this particular temple on his island was a place of child abuse and child sacrifice. Again, Kronos devours his children. All right. I think that we can take a break here, and we will get to clues that help us interpret the text with the next lecture.